You keep telling yourself you're tired, that it's too much, that you just need a break. But what if you're wrong? What if the thing draining you isn't how much you're doing, but how little of it actually means anything? What if burnout isn't exhaustion, but a quiet kind of starvation? Stay with this, because it shifts in the final section. There's a kind of tiredness that no amount of sleep touches, a kind of fog that settles over your thoughts, your mood, your movement, even when the calendar is clear, even when the workload is light. This isn't exhaustion from effort. It's the fatigue of something deeper, misalignment, meaninglessness, monotony, and yet you keep naming it as burnout. You call it stress, overwhelm, pressure. You tell yourself you just need a reset, a vacation, a few days off. But time keeps passing, and the heaviness stays. We've been trained to believe that burnout is about overdoing, too much hustle, not enough rest. But what if that's a distraction? What if the real issue isn't how much energy you're spending, but what you're spending it on? Byung-Chul Han, the philosopher who diagnosed the quiet sickness of our age, argues that the modern self is not oppressed by others, but by its own compulsion to perform. In his view, we are no longer slaves to external demands. We are slaves to internal optimization. Productivity isn't forced, it's self-inflicted. You become your own taskmaster, measuring your worth by how much you can produce, how fast you can improve, how flawlessly you can present the illusion of balance. But this pressure doesn't generate burnout the way we think it does. It's not that you worked too hard, it's that you worked in ways that made you feel hollow. You said yes to what was expected. You got better at playing the part. You refined the systems. You removed friction. You made yourself efficient, and in that process, something vital disappeared. There's a cost to becoming streamlined. You stop noticing what used to move you, the things that once felt alive. Curiosity, novelty, imagination get filed away as distractions. You don't have time to sit with your own thoughts anymore. There's always something due, something to manage, some version of yourself you need to upgrade. And so the days blur, the weeks compress. You go to bed wondering what you actually did and wake up already behind. It feels like fatigue, but it's not. It's the slow erosion of depth. The weight isn't in your muscles, it's in your perception. Everything feels the same. Every task blends into the next. You've optimized yourself into a corner where you can't tell if you're progressing or just moving. The true damage of this state is that it mimics success. From the outside, you're doing fine. You're responsible, you're productive, you're engaged. No one suspects that internally, you feel like you're watching your own life from behind glass. And because there's no obvious crisis, you assume it's just a phase, something to push through. But this isn't a phase. It's a signal, a warning from the deeper part of you, the part that doesn't care about metrics or milestones, the part that is starving for meaning and knows you've been feeding it nothing but momentum. You're not burnt out, you're undernourished, and what you've been calling tired is actually something else entirely. Most people never realize what they've lost. They just know something feels off. There's a kind of background dissatisfaction that no accomplishment can quiet. You keep chasing the next thing, expecting it to land harder, to mean more. But every goal arrives already empty. Every win fades too fast. And in the silence that follows, you scroll, you distract, you start again. Because doing something, anything, feels better than sitting with the hollow. Byung-Chul Han calls this psychic fatigue, a burnout of the inner life. It's not caused by overexertion, but by exposure, constant, unfiltered, surface-level stimulation. You're surrounded by motion, but deprived of meaning. Your senses are saturated, but your spirit is unfed. You've replaced nourishment with noise. The dopamine loops of modern life, notifications, metrics, checklists, give the illusion of forward motion. They mimic significance, but they don't anchor you. They don't deepen you. They don't tether your effort to any real internal resonance. And slowly, the gap grows between what you do and what you care about, between the version of yourself you perform and the one you barely recognize anymore. This is why burnout today doesn't feel like a breakdown. It feels like a flat line. You're not exploding, you're eroding. There's no crisis to wake you up, just the low hum of disconnection. You work, you reply, you contribute. But inside, nothing lands, nothing moves, nothing feels earned. And you can't fix that with a weekend off. The reason rest doesn't help is because rest only repairs energy. What you've lost is vitality. Energy lets you function. Vitality makes you care, and the longer you live without it, the more performative your life becomes. You smile, you joke, you post, you show up. But it's not you, it's your autopilot. And it's just good enough to pass. Eventually, your mind starts to rebel, not with anxiety or panic, but with a strange resistance to everything. The tasks that once felt natural become unbearable. The days start to drag. Your motivation disappears. Your focus fractures. You feel constantly unsettled but can't explain why. This is hunger, not for food or rest, but for connection to self. And it's hard to name because nothing on the surface is visibly wrong. You haven't collapsed. You haven't failed. You've just become untethered from the parts of life that give it shape. Han argues that we live in a time where meaning is no longer cultivated. It's consumed. Inspiration has been outsourced to content. Reflection outsourced to feedback. Instead of asking, "What matters to me?" we ask, "What works for the algorithm?" And slowly, you lose the muscle of meaning-making. You stop building an inner world. You become a mirror, reflecting trends, adapting tone, simulating presence, until one day you wake up and realize you don't know what you believe anymore. You only know what you're expected to say. This is the root of the weariness you can't shake. You are not depleted, you are disconnected. And until that hunger is named, it cannot be fed. Now you'll see how that disconnection becomes a kind of identity loss and why it feels like nothing is enough. There's a moment, quiet, unmarked, when your identity begins to split. On one side, there's the person you're supposed to be, the one who shows up, delivers, adapts, improves. The version of you that fits the setting, knows the lines, stays in sync with what's expected. This is the self you've curated, the reliable one. The version that earns praise, avoids disruption, and knows how to keep things moving. But on the other side, something else lingers. A quieter version, an older version. The part of you that doesn't want to perform, that wants to feel something again, that misses the unstructured moments, the slow, strange human ones that don't scale or sell or optimize. That version doesn't speak much anymore. It doesn't interrupt your schedule, but its silence is loud. Because what most people call discipline is often just disconnection. It's not grounded in values, it's a mask made of structure. A routine that protects you from having to ask whether you're still living in alignment. And at some point, that routine stops being a support system and becomes a trap. You wake up and enter the costume. You follow the cues. You complete the tasks. And by evening, you feel a little more hollow. But because nothing looks broken, you assume it's just your mindset. Maybe you need better habits, more sleep, a mindset reset, a productivity hack. But all of that assumes the problem is mechanical, that you're a system to be tuned. You're not. You're a psyche, a soul, a conscious being meant to experience inner friction, emotional contradiction, and existential weight. And when you live a life where those things have no space, where your only goal is to be more efficient, you eventually lose the ability to feel anything at all. Byung-Chul Han writes that modern suffering isn't caused by repression, but by overexposure. We don't block ourselves, we dissolve into everything. Our attention is scattered across tasks, tabs, timelines. We're always aware, always available, always slightly performing. There is no container, no inner sanctum, no protected interior. And so the self becomes thin, functional, but fragile, present but never fully here. This is the real reason nothing feels satisfying. You've become so used to existing in fragmented attention that nothing can land deeply. You read but don't remember. You finish but don't feel it. Even pleasure is brief, like sound through water. There's no echo, no impact, just motion. Over time, that shallowness rewires you. You begin to fear depth, to avoid stillness, because stillness is where the questions live, the ones you no longer want to answer. Am I proud of this version of myself? Do I even believe in the path I'm on? Or have I just gotten used to pretending? These aren't questions burnout lets you ignore. They surface at 2 a.m. They echo in silent moments. They drag down your motivation, not because you're lazy, but because your inner world no longer matches your outer life, and your psyche feels the split. This is why discipline eventually breaks. Because it was never fueled by belief. It was a defense against uncertainty. And the moment your structure loses meaning, you collapse with it. There's a dark irony buried inside burnout. Sometimes it only arrives after you've made it. Not when you're failing, not when you're struggling, but when everything seems to be working. You've become who you were trying to be. Dependable, focused, functional. You've built systems. You've followed the frameworks. You've hit milestones that used to feel distant. And yet, you feel nothing. Worse than nothing, maybe. You feel numb, trapped, disoriented, as if the version of yourself that was supposed to feel proud, fulfilled, energized, never showed up. This is the fracture no one talks about. The part where success doesn't save you. It erases you. Because what you built to reach your goals might be the very thing that made you forget who you were before them. Byung-Chul Han said that the modern subject is not oppressed by others, but by the pressure to achieve oneself. The self becomes a task, a project, a brand. Everything is measured, everything is tracked. You don't just have goals, you are the goal. And when your identity fuses with your output, you no longer exist outside of achievement. This is the invisible prison of success. You can't stop performing the version of yourself that everyone expects to see. Because that version works. It gets results, it earns validation, it keeps the momentum alive. But deep down, you know it's unsustainable, because that version wasn't designed for joy. It was designed for progress. And there's a cost to that kind of design. You stop doing things for their own sake. You stop feeling wonder. You stop asking if you still care. Because in a system where everything must be useful, even your inner world becomes a resource to be mined. Your thoughts become content. Your growth becomes a metric. Your silence becomes wasted time. And slowly, you begin to disappear beneath the structure you built to succeed. This is why the collapse feels so confusing. You can't tell if something's wrong or if this is just how life feels now. You question your mindset, your habits, your routine. But you don't question the architecture of the self you're living inside, because questioning that would mean tearing something down. Something you've spent years building, something that once saved you. And that's the quiet tragedy of burnout. It often happens inside the exact identity that once made you feel powerful. The version of you that was built to impress, achieve, and prove is now the one suffocating you. But you keep performing it because you don't know who else to be, because you're afraid that without this identity, you'll collapse completely. But here's what no one tells you. You're not collapsing because you've lost your identity. You're collapsing because you've outgrown it. The burnout isn't a breakdown. It's your inner self demanding a new form. And it won't go away until you listen. Somewhere along the way, you stopped asking for more. Not more money, not more status, not more recognition, but more aliveness. more of the things that don't fit inside a calendar, more moments that slow you down instead of speeding you up, more thoughts that don't serve a goal, more conversations that don't need a timestamp. But when you live inside a culture of achievement, those needs become inconvenient. You learn to silence them, to replace wonder with structure, to trade presence for progress. You learn to adapt, to accelerate, to outperform. And eventually, you forget what it's like to feel anything that isn't directed, managed, or monetized. Byung-Chul Han warned that we've replaced contemplation with exposure. We're constantly stimulated but rarely moved. We've become spectators of our own thoughts, scrolling through ourselves like we scroll through content. Nothing lands, nothing roots, nothing lingers. This is the moment where burnout mutates into something more dangerous: resignation. You stop seeking nourishment and start settling for distraction. You stop hoping for meaning and start numbing the hunger with routine. You convince yourself that this is just what life is. You learn to cope with the ache. But here's what you won't say out loud, what haunts you in your quietest moments. You miss yourself, not the productive self, not the polished one, not the brand you've become, but the self that used to wonder, the one that asked strange questions, the one that got lost in ideas for no reason, the one that felt something when they read or wrote or built or loved. That self didn't need clarity. They didn't need an audience. They didn't need to monetize their inspiration. They just needed space, and you stopped giving it to them. Now that hunger is back, and no amount of time management will make it go away, because it isn't about how you manage your hours. It's about what your hours are made of. If every task is a transaction, if every thought is for show, your inner life will begin to starve, no matter how busy you are. That's why your exhaustion doesn't make sense, why it feels untouchable by rest. Because you don't need recovery. You need resonance. You need to do something that doesn't scale, to be someone who doesn't need optimizing, to reclaim even a sliver of time where you're not trying to become, but just being. This isn't about quitting your job or blowing up your schedule. It's about creating one honest moment each day where the mask drops, where you're not performing a version of yourself, but reconnecting with something unscripted. That hunger will not disappear because it's the only thing keeping you from going fully numb. And if you keep silencing it, you won't just lose energy, you'll lose yourself. Most people try to outrun burnout. They treat it like a malfunction, a system overload, a flaw in the schedule, fixable with time off, a better routine, or another podcast. But burnout isn't a scheduling error. It's a signal, not from your body, from your psyche, from the part of you that can't keep pretending. Byung-Chul Han never offered solutions. He didn't write guides or give advice. What he did was name the shape of suffering, the invisible structure of how modern life slowly erodes the self. And what he saw was this: burnout isn't caused by too much. It's caused by too little connection, too little depth, too little stillness, too little inner truth. The real pain comes not from what you're doing, but from who you're doing it as. An identity that once gave you momentum, but now feels like a cage. And here's the terrifying part. Most people would rather stay tired than risk changing who they are. Because change isn't just inconvenient, it's annihilation. It's letting go of the version of you that people trust, depend on, admire. It's stepping outside the structure that gives you safety. It's walking into the unknown. But what's the alternative? To keep numbing? Keep optimizing a life that quietly sickens you? Keep pretending that this version of you is just going through a phase? Or do you stop? Do you listen to the hunger? Do you admit that you've outgrown your identity? Not because it was wrong, but because it's finished. That's what burnout really is. It's the final limit of the self you've been performing. The point where your psyche refuses to keep playing along. The breakdown that arrives not to destroy you, but to show you what you've been afraid to look at, that your life needs to change shape, that your energy can no longer be wasted on surfaces, that your joy, your insight, your meaning will not be found by pushing harder, but by collapsing inward, returning to the part of you that doesn't want to be improved, but simply wants to exist without performance. This is not a fall, it's a return to your unoptimized self, your unproductive desires, your unsellable inner world. And if you can sit with the emptiness without rushing to fix it, you'll start to feel something again. Not motivation, not clarity, not ambition, but space. And from that space, something else will rise. Not the next goal, but the next version of you, not built from pressure, but born from truth. So the next time you whisper to yourself, "I'm burnt out," ask what part of you is starving and whether the collapse you're feeling might be the only honest thing left. Now the question becomes, what will you build in its place?